of the activities that are done out of the Environmental Utility Fund. And so that the rates are charged based on recovering the costs of operations over the next 5 years. So we're looking at expenditures planned over the next 5 years for street improvements as well as all the other activities. 2010 revenues will increase by $115,500. That will equal up to $1.7 million. Next, looking at our recycling. We have a balance in that fund of about $500,000, and it's our recommendation that we not change the rates for that fund. There is, as I said, the sufficient balance. There is some uncertainty, of course, in the recycling market. What was a very healthy market for recycled products has largely dried up. And so there is some risk to us that we'll probably be decreasing that fund balance over the course of 2010. But as I said, it's sufficiently high to withstand anything that we might see. Rates are charged based on the recovering costs of operations. And the recycling fund revenues will total about $500,000. And as I said, the fund balance is projected to be at $500,000. Going to the sanitary sewer fund, we're also projecting a 7% increase in service charges for 2010. The capital improvement plan would call for a 7% increase in each of the next 5 years. Although at the end of 2012, that fund would be projected to be at about a break even, and over 2013 and 14 would be building up a balance. But for the next 3 years, that fund really does need a 7% increase. And once again, it's based on recovering the costs of operations over the next 5 years. We're not necessarily taking a look at it on a individual year basis, but looking over those 5-year period. So 2010 revenues will be increased by $0.7 million, and the revenues will total $4.7 million. Looking at operating expenditures by department, you can see total expenditures of $31,887,000. We've got small decreases in most departments. We have a small increase in fire, an increase in police, and we show in here $196,640 under Parks and Recreation. That's for the 2.5 positions or 2 positions that we've talked about. And since there wasn't any category for that last year, it shows up as all increase. The net increase over the 2009 budget is $164,308. General fund revenues are up 0.3%. Largely made up of taxes, increased by $673,000. Charges for services are increased by $88,000. Licenses and permits were projected at a decrease of $224,000. Intergovernmental revenue is decreasing by $415,000, and that is market value homestead credit. Net other revenues are decreasing by $73,000. Our General fund expenditures are up 0.4% at $18,158,000. And as you can see, most of the increase here is in personnel services. Pretty much of a corresponding decrease in contractual services, a decrease in capital outlay, and a little bit of an increase in commodities. The net effect of that is about $68,000. Looking at the capital improvements budget, we're projecting revenues at an increase of 28.5%. This increase is due primarily to increased park availability charges of about $150,000 that are projected for 2010, and state street construction aid.
Mr. Rosbach has a question.
So Bob, it seems in past years when we have done some projecting of our park accessibility charges, and then we've had projects not develop, we've ended up just then having to set aside those projects due to lack of funds. Is that what we would anticipate again? And I ask because I'm assuming that the expectation is from the Gladstone area, for the most part.
Correct. And yes, we would not be spending them until they're received.
Thank you.
Moving on to capital improvements expenditures, once again, it's up 34.8% due to park and trail projects, fire truck replacement, and street projects. And following along, it's on page 208 in the budget book is where most of that is spelled out. This next slide is just shows the tax increment projects. These are all funded prior to 2006. I think it's actually before that. And those numbers don't change a great deal. And 2 years ago it was $229,000. These are the projects that are planned in capital improvements. Largest one, Hills and Dales, area streets at $5,190,000. White Bear Avenue, $3,174,000. Stillwater Trail and Drainage, $1,004,000. Howard Ripley, $1,040,000, and kind of go down from there. The total on that is $11,974,000. Looking at debt service budget, our expenditures are up 2.6% due to the issuance of the 2009 A bonds in 2009. At the end of 2009, our total debt will be about $73 million, and at the end of 2010, our total debt would be estimated at $79 million, based on the issuance of $10 million of additional debt. And of course that number is always subject to revision as we get closer to doing the projects. After 2010, as you recall from our discussion of the capital improvement plan, the debt will begin to decrease. So we anticipate it peaking at this $79 million amount in 2010.
Mr. Nephew has a question.
Yes.
This is another one on the debt service. On page 251 of the budget again, where the debt service expenditures are listed, I noticed that there's a line for called bonds, and we have done refundings. So I'm just curious, how do the refundings get accounted for in the budget? Do they not get listed? I mean, Is it just treated as a wash, and so it's not counted even though the original bonds were called? And if so, what's the purpose of that line?
Members of the council, any refundings, first off, we do them when the opportunity arises, so it's pretty difficult to put them in a budget. The refundings we do are current refundings, and so we're really just exchanging one debt for another, and with an expected decrease in interest costs going forward. So there really isn't much of an impact on the debt service fund of a current refunding.
So would that line in the budget be there if we either did a non-current refunding, or if, say, we had excess funds of some type and simply used them for paying down the debt by calling some high-interest debt?
That's correct. That could happen. In fact, in 2009, we made the final payment on a bond issue that had been advance refunded at, I don't even recall what year that was, but we had about $2.5 million in an escrow fund that was just being held until those bonds reached a call date. And then, just in this year now, those bonds were actually then called and paid.
Mr. Minnick, could you go back to that slide that showed the debt figures for '09 and '10? Thank you. Because we inevitably have people who think they can pick those little numbers off that screen and explain it all to the world in their terms of what's explicable, is there a better way for us to explain to people? Because if you look at the end of '09, total debt will be $73 million. At the end of 2010, it'll be $79 million. This is oversimplification, but how would you set about explaining to people what the debt load really means and how the number of bonds impacts it? Does that make sense to you? Because people seem to think that we just sit up here and willy-nilly approve a street project and, no big deal, and we're not looking at that number. But we actually do have, remarkably enough, guidance from people like the manager and you and Mr. All. But there's a need to explain it to people, because otherwise people just take the number and go, oh my word, we're $79 million in debt! The sky is falling. So how do we anticipate explaining that?
Interesting question.
Your job,
I guess
not mine.
my opinion, my explanation of this would be, over the past few years, actually since I've been here, I think the city has done a very good job of taking advantage of opportunities for cheap prices on street reconstructions, and borrowing to take advantage of that, I believe, is fiscally prudent. That when we can save $1 million on a project by issuing some bonds, I think it makes sense. Now, having said that, $79 million is probably getting about as high as I really want to be comfortable with. I mean, we do have to keep that debt load down, and so there's a balance that has to be struck. And certainly, if the economy had been different over these past couple of years and we had not had the opportunities for the savings that we've had, my approach to issuing debt would have been entirely different. Does that answer?
Starts. We'll talk about it. I just want people to realize that you have a handle on this, and that seems like a huge number to us, because in our households, that's many more zeros than we'll ever see. But it has to do with taking advantage of, cities are always in debt. I guess that's the first thing people need to understand. I mean, it isn't like at home where you go, oh, the mortgage is paid up, yahoo! Now we have a vacation fund. It doesn't work that way in government. And so sometimes we borrow ahead like this, if you will, to save money in the long run. That's kind of my point. But I think we need to spend a little time talking about like kinds of bonds